Kia ora, and welcome to Shared Lunch, brought to you by Sharesies with BusinessDesk. I'm Susannah Batley, and I'm the General Manager of Company Partnerships here at Sharesies. Before we get started, here is some important information.
Investing involves risk. You might lose the money you start with. We recommend talking to a licensed financial advisor. We also recommend reading product disclosure documents before deciding to invest. Everything you're about to see and hear is current at the time of recording.
Today we're joined by Dr. Peter Meintjes, who is CEO of Pacific Edge. Welcome, Peter.
Thanks very much for having me, Susannah.
So first of all, can you give us a short description of what Pacific Edge does and the benefit that Pacific Edge is bringing to market?
Sure. So Pacific Edge makes a bladder cancer diagnostic test called Cxbladder. It actually comes in a couple of different versions, as it were. We're used to detect bladder cancer early when patients present at a primary care physician's office with blood in their urine. And we're also used to identify recurring disease in patients that are post-operative or post-surgery and that may be having a recurrence of the cancer coming around again. And the earlier you catch something like bladder cancer, the more treatment options there are available to the physician. So we think it's really valuable to physicians and to patients by using non-invasive urine-based testing like Cxbladder really early in the care of patients.
Yeah, great. And what is your background? How long have you been with Pacific Edge, and what makes you personally excited to be at the helm?
Sure. Well, so my background is originally as a scientist, and I trained at the University of Auckland and did a BSc, MSc and PhD all there many years ago. I subsequently worked for an Auckland-based company called Biomatters, and then started working out of the United States. I worked at a company called Omixon and became the CEO. Omixon was involved in organ transplant diagnostics, specifically for donor and recipient matching. And then I worked for another company called Transplant Genomics, which is involved in diagnostic testing for kidney rejection. And now I have the opportunity to lead Pacific Edge, which is obviously involved in bladder cancer diagnostics. And a lot of these, each of these different companies share a lot in common, the underlying technology, but also the value that they bring to patients. And so, I'm delighted to be leading a company with a strongly social mission to help diagnose cancer early, because if we try to if we're successful, then fewer and fewer people would be affected by cancer.
And let's talk results. Can you give us an overview and some of the key points of the recent results that have been announced?
Yeah, absolutely. So the headline from Pacific Edge's standpoint is that total laboratory throughput, which is the number of tests that we processed worldwide, was up 37%. This was driven by total laboratory throughput, total commercial throughput of 39% increase. And that has resulted in an operating revenue increase of 71%. Now, because we do a lot of business in the United States, some of that 71% increase is driven by foreign exchange gains. But because we operate in the United States, a lot of our costs are also driven by costs in the US. And as a consequence, we had an operating loss of $27 million, which is normal for a company like ours that's in a very strong growth mode, and we have a healthy cash balance of $77.8 million at the end of the financial year, March 31st.
So no plans at this stage to undertake another capital raise or anything like that on the horizon?
No plans for a capital raise on the horizon. We have sufficient capital for executing on our current plans, yeah.
Back in August last year, it was announced that Pacific Edge's Cxbladder tests may not be covered by Novitas. With those tests currently representing a decent amount of testing revenue, can you give us a short summary of this potential issue and what that might mean for Pacific Edge and any update that you can give on where that is?
Yeah, it's a deeply complex issue. And so we've done our best to try to explain this to the market. But in another sense, it's also quite routine. The local Medicare administrative contractor for Pacific Edge does this sort of thing all the time, but it does in this situation have potentially high consequence for a company like Pacific Edge. But so the proposal, as currently worded, is obviously something that Pacific Edge has had the opportunity to comment on since August. And the nature of this process is that it is somewhat opaque. It is actually unethical of us to try to lobby for a particular result directly with our Medicare administrative contractor, but we are able to work through coalition partners like C21, and they can facilitate multiple companies having a conversation with Novitas to ensure that our point of view is communicated. Now, even though what was proposed has consequences for Pacific Edge, we have always maintained that we're not the target, and in fact, the documentation that Novitas has published highlights that we're not the target of this. They have a challenge where there are a large number of simple single nucleotide polymorphism tests that are used to guide therapeutic decisions. And if that doesn't sound familiar to you in the context of Cxbladder, it's because it's not. That's a very different type of testing. It's called personalized diagnostic testing, or PGX testing, and those are the kinds of tests where there's a lot of tests with unverified clinical information that they are uncertain how to cover, and so they have a problem. And so they've proposed a solution. Unfortunately, this solution has in our view, an unintended consequence for Pacific Edge, and that's the case that we've made, through the comments that we provided back to Novitas in the formal process. Unfortunately, it is, from our perspective, somewhat of a black box from here, but the potential outcomes can be summarized as follows. One is they could say, hey, look, we thought this was a good solution, but it turns out it's not, and we're going to withdraw it. Another is that and that of course would be a favorable result for Pacific Edge. Another is that they decide or they don't take any action, and it reaches July 28th this year, in which case it automatically expires, and that's a favorable outcome for Pacific Edge. There is the possibility that they ignore all of our comments and the comments made by the other companies that we believe should not be affected by the proposed change, but we believe that's of low probability that they'll do that. The most likely result is that they will listen to the comments, and they will make a decision as to which of those comments to adopt with changes in the proposed LCD and which ones to ignore. And of course, if they listen to some of ours, that would then be another path to a favorable result. I would also point out that in the meantime, another one of our tests, Cxbladder Triage, did manage to achieve coverage through a mechanism that we were previously unaware of, and this appears to be a logical path that Novitas could take to allow continued coverage for tests like Cxbladder, which are advanced genomic tests with algorithmic analyses, compared to the simple personalized genomic testings that are a guide to therapeutic decision making.
And just to confirm, so come end of July, you'll have more clarity on, what the outcome might be.
Correct. If there is no action prior to the 28th of July this year, it will be a favourable result, and we will continue to have coverage under the current LCD. Got it.
And what would you say are some of the things that you've been most proud of in the last 6 to 12 months?
There are a number of them. Probably the most important one, though, is trying to bridge the tyranny of distance between what is the 65% of the company that operates in the United States and the 35% of the company that operates in New Zealand. So, our commercial force in the US is substantial, and making sure that they are resourced by our digital team, our operations team, our technical team, from New Zealand is very important. And so there are a lot of 7 a.m., 8 a.m., 9 a.m. meetings back to back that we have to go through to make sure that all of the different that the US team is adequately supported by all of the teams that they depend on in New Zealand. I'm also very proud of quickly identifying that there was a gap in medical affairs and finding a leader, Dr. Tamar Abushwareb, who we initially hired as a VP of Medical Affairs to establish the team, and he's done such a great job that we recently promoted him to the Chief Medical Officer position. So this is the first time that Pacific Edge has had a member of the C-suite based in the United States, and I think that represents the quality of the candidate that we have and the quality of the team that we're building over there.
Great. And where do you see the growth opportunities in Pacific Edge, and where do you hope to be in the next, say, 3 to 5 years?
So, we regularly publish a slide that highlights there are about 4.5 million testing opportunities if our tests are used optimally in the market. And that's a long way from where we are now, having published that it's just over 30,000 tests at the moment. So we see that there is tremendous growth opportunity, and sorry, that's just thinking about the US market. So we already have coverage from Medicare, and so we get paid on the vast majority of those tests. And that gives us the opportunity to drive revenue in the United States and from the people who are already ordering our test. So, our view is that the market is less than 1% saturated as a general rule. And so there's a tremendous amount of growth that we can have in our current markets. That said, we have a business development, market development-like focus in Australia, and with the appointment of a new president of the APAC region, a focus on not just Singapore, but all of Southeast Asia.
And what's the one thing you'd like to say to retail investors?
That you can join us on our social mission. We are here to make our best effort at trying to eliminate bladder cancer. We can't eliminate the cancer itself, but we can provide early detection mechanisms so that fewer people end up with muscle invasive disease at first diagnosis, for example, which is a key thing that we are trying to change in the hematuria detection part of our business, but also that people who have unfortunately had a cancer diagnosis get it early enough that the surgical options available to them will be successful, and instead of having to lose their whole bladder, that they might just need to have what's called a TURBT, a transurethral resection of a bladder tumor, which is just cutting out the tumor and then some treatment, so they get to keep their bladder. And the early detection diagnostics that are non-invasive and available to everyone massively improve our ability to catch cancer early. Finally,
just to recap, what is the one takeaway from today's episode that you think investors need to know?
I would probably point to our top line growth. We are a growth business. Obviously, we have to grow within the context of the capital that we have available to us, but we want to be judged based on delivery of milestones, and that includes throughput and revenue-based milestones, and that's where we would like to have investors focus. As and when we achieve those milestones, we expect to continue to grow the company valuation and continue the growth story for many, many years as we go from that journey of 30,000 samples a year, which we are today, to somewhere of the order of over 1 million plus in the years to come. And that's just with our current products. We, of course, as we're successful with our current products, we expect to be able to continue to bring additional products to market, but we've got to make sure that we can run a profitable business on the basis of the current products first.
Well, thanks for tuning in, everyone, and a big thanks to Peter for joining us. We really do appreciate your time and insights, so thank you.
I'm delighted to be here. Thanks very much, Susannah.